Chapter 7. I stared unseeingly at the moon illuminating the mountaintops on the horizon beyond the sea. The warm summer breeze blew into the room, scented with salt, but I refused to acknowledge its comfort, nor could I appreciate the stars glimmering across the clear sky. Even the Laris constellation seemed to mock me. I couldn't see any way out of my situation, and the open window taunted me with escape's forbidden freedom. My curse prevented me leaving, and I had been set an impossible task. Poor Papa, he would never understand when the news of my execution reached his ears. My view of the distant mountains was suddenly obstructed as Rhys's pale and sweating face popped into view. It took me a full minute to realize I wasn't hallucinating. It wasn't until Rhys choked out, "I could use some help here," that I ran over to help pull him over the window's ledge. He was trembling all over and collapsed immediately. The coil of rope he had slung over his shoulder slid off his arm into a tangled knot on the stone floor. "Rhys, what are you doing? How did you get up here?" "Why do you think I'm so out of breath? I climbed this stupid tower for you." While Rhys gasped for air on the floor, I peered over the edge of the window and shuddered at the dizzying sight from the top of my tall, rock-faced tower. It was a long distance to where the waves crashed onto the rocks far below me. I raised my eyebrows skeptically at Rhys. He had never been known for his athletic abilities. "You must have been incredibly motivated." "The fear of falling to your death does that." He staggered upright, still massaging his hands and arms, and surveyed the room littered with piles of straw. "I heard about the engagement. It's all over town. I'm here to rescue you. Operation Elopement is in effect." Despite my skepticism that the curse would even allow me to leave, I securely fastened one end of the rope to the window's iron sill and flung the rope out. It uncoiled as it descended and swung gently in the night breeze. Taking a deep breath, I tried to move my body to sit on the windowsill, but my feet grew roots and held me paralyzed. I was impeded by the same dilemma I'd faced when I'd tried to run away before. My feet refused to listen to my brain. Try as I might, I couldn't master control of my own body. The minutes crawled by as I continued to try to logically navigate any way around Papa's order so I could escape. Rhys continued to catch his breath, but I stood frozen, holding the sides of the window and trying to coerce my body to descend the rope. I was furious with myself for being so helpless. Finally, Rhys came to my side. It only took him one glance at my white-knuckled grip on the window ledge to understand. "Can you leave?" I shook my head, trying desperately not to cry in front of Rhys as the weight of all that had transpired that day crashed around my ears. He hugged me from behind and buried his face into my hair. "I know." I turned and hugged him back, melting into his warm embrace. He, of all people, could comprehend the gravity of the situation, could understand my inability to leave. How often had I seen him trying to break his own curse and refuse to spin straw into gold? But his hands always acted of their own accord, with the rest of Rhys along for the ride. Now it was my turn to experience what that was like. Rhys released me and took my hands. I thought it was to comfort me until he lifted my left hand up to his eyes. The king's elaborate engagement ring caught the light from the candles, but the glittering had a cold, unfeeling gleam to it. He let go of my hand as if he had been burned. "I never even asked. Do you want to marry him?" He scuffed the toe of his leather shoes on the straw-covered floor. "I understand if you do. He is royalty, after all." My shoulders slumped as misery took over. "No, I don't want to marry him. I tried to run away, Rhys. I did. But I can't. My curse won't allow it." I twisted his promise ring around my thumb. "Maybe if you knock me out and carry me down?" I suggested. Rhys smiled weakly. "Personally, I would rather wallop the king over the head. Knocking out girls and carrying them off to a cave isn't really my style. Besides, he blushed scarlet, I don't think I could carry you down the tower. I'm not strong enough. He hung his head, ashamed, then let out a weak chuckle. If only Hrothgar were here, he would be more than happy to tote you away. If it were a choice between Drupert and Hrothgar, I think I would use that spindle over there to impale myself. Rhys frowned. Don't joke like that, Meg. We'll find a way out of this. What is the king like? I began to tremble. Horrible, I whispered, then drew in a ragged, gasping breath and told Rhys everything. As I recounted the story of my forced engagement and of the king's threats, Rhys folded his arms around me. I relaxed against the comfort of his embrace and closed my eyes, wanting nothing but to soak up his presence. So, you have to turn all this straw into gold, or else you die? I nodded miserably. I thought as much. Rhys squared his shoulders and drew a deep breath. Meg, you know what to do. Ask me. No, I burst out. I won't. It isn't fair to you. I won't contribute to your curse. Unless I miss my guess, your fiancé got gold fever the second he got wind of someone who can spin straw into gold, and assumed it was you. That makes it my fault you are here. It isn't your fault. Meg, I want to do this for you. I came here to save your life, however that needs to be done. Now ask me. No. Rhys leaned his forehead against mine. You can do it, Meg. Offer a trade. But you'll get hurt. Rhys's hands, already constantly painful and sore, would be shredded if he spun such a ridiculous amount of straw. And I refuse to let chronic pain take my decisions away from me. That belongs solely to me, and I am making the choice to save you. A tear slipped out of my eye, but I still shook my head. I would not let Rhys suffer because of me. Meg, I won't let you die. Not if I can help it. You need gold, and I can give it to you, but you have to trade me. If you don't, you would be asking me to watch you die instead. No. My voice cracked. Rhys knew me too well. He would know that I was about to crumble. If only I had more resolve. But the images of nooses and descending swords flashed through my mind, along with Rhys's horrified face amongst the crowd. Watching my execution would be far more painful for him than any amount of spinning, and I hated to admit how much I feared the pain of death. Rhys crossed his arms stubbornly. You know I won't leave until you agree. I wouldn't be able to live with myself knowing I could have saved you and didn't. I am going to do this for you. I don't have anything to give you in return. Rhys thought, and after a long pause suggested, How about your ring? Of course. How could I have forgotten? It would fetch a fortune, and selling it would get Rhys enough money to start a whole new life. I wrenched off the king's ugly engagement ring and held it out to him, but Rhys recoiled. I meant the other ring. How could I have forgotten? The trade had to be something of value for the person who would receive the spun gold. Slowly, I replaced the cold band of silver onto my left hand and rotated the thin circle of braided golden strands on my right thumb. You really want it back? I asked quietly. I couldn't meet his eyes. He nodded and silently held out his hand. A lump swelled in my throat. Of course he would want it back. He would never be able to run away to get married before the king had one or both of our heads. It was better this way, for us to cut off all ties to each other. The least I could do would be to return the ring and let Rhys find someone else, someone he could be happy with, even if it wasn't me. I slipped the promise ring from my hand and pressed it into his thickly calloused palm. Rhys, will you spin for me? My words were barely more than a whisper, and I despised the way they felt on my tongue. For you, anything. His words went through me like physical pain. I could see the anguish in his eyes as he sat down at the wheel and began to spin the gold that would promise me to another man. Ceaselessly, Rhys fed straw in and worked the pedal. Whir, whir, whir. The straw glowed bright yellow as it passed through his hands and transformed to pure gold by the time it wrapped around the spindle. In too short of a time, his hands broke open and began to bleed as the straw turned metal sliced through the flesh in his fingers. But he never stopped or complained. He ignored the drops of blood that rained from his palms. But I couldn't. How often had his horrible adoptive mother forced him to spin until his hands bled? I had always loathed her for subjecting Rhys to it, and now I was doing the same thing. I hated myself as I stared at the droplets spattering the cold stone floor. Just as I had always done when Rhys was forced to spin, I gathered the spindles of spun gold and placed them out of the way on the far border of the room, then heaved bundles of straw back to Rhys's side. He barely spoke at all, and I couldn't think of anything to say. At one point, I tried feebly to joke that this was the worst Club for the Cursed meeting we had ever had, but Rhys ignored the comment. It looked as though he may vomit if he opened his mouth. It took many hours to complete all the spinning, twice as long as Mildred had ever forced him to spin in one sitting. But Rhys still managed to finish before dawn. It was pitch black outside the window. The baskets of spindles fat with gold glimmered in the candlelight, but I couldn't have cared less about them. I only had eyes for Rhys, whose shoulders sagged down. He sat on the stool before the spinning wheel, staring at his blistered and bleeding hands, which continued to drip onto the stone floor. His joints looked more inflamed than ever from the hours of spinning, his crooked fingers stiff as he tried to flex them. I began to massage his hands for him, as I had done in the past, but bit my lip when I saw him grimace with every touch, no matter how gentle, and desisted. There was barely any skin that wasn't shredded from the gold. All of his joints were tender, swollen, and felt warm to the touch. Tears sprang to my eyes as I looked, but I tried to hurriedly blink them away as I wiped his blood off on my skirts. Rhys hated people feeling sorry for him. "I should go," Rhys said glumly. I couldn't let him leave. Not yet. If we never saw each other again. "Rhys," my voice faltered. He looked up at me, and there was agony in every line of his face. I dropped my gaze to his hands. Even as blood continued to seep from the wounds, his fingers still curled around the promise ring he had reclaimed. I tore my gown to create bandages for his hands as he slowly tucked the ring back into his vest pocket. The moment I finished wrapping his hands, Rhys slowly crossed the room to the open window where the rope was still hung, tantalizing me with the forbidden escape. "Rhys, wait!" I couldn't let him go. He had to stay, at least for a few more minutes. I wanted to kiss him so badly that my chest ached, but knew that he would never willingly kiss a woman who was engaged to someone else. "Meg, don't make this harder than it already is." "Please?" I held my arms open. "I need you." Rhys only hesitated for a fraction of a second before he acquiesced. We hugged each other for a long time. I wished one of our curses enabled us to freeze time. I buried my face against his chest and sighed. "Rhys, I love you." He swallowed hard. "Meg, I love you too. You know that. But we can't." "I know." Our fates were never meant to be entwined, but that knowledge made our parting even worse. As I looked at Rhys's bandaged fingers, I knew that he would never be able to climb back down again. When I pointed this out to Rhys, he smiled ruefully and held out his hands, which had hardened into fists that were nearly impossible for him to flex. "See, it will be very difficult for me to let go when my joints have already locked up like this." I shook my head at him. "I can at least stop you from getting hurt worse." In the end, we hoisted up the rope and made a makeshift harness for Rhys. I never would have been able to pull him up the tower, but by winding the rope around the iron candle brackets set into the walls, I was able to let out the rope in intervals so that Rhys was lowered to the ground below. I tried to force my feet to follow him, tried to tell my hands to climb down after him, but my curse held me paralyzed. With every increment of rope that I let out, I felt my heart tear a little more as I increased the physical distance between myself and the man I loved more than my own life. Once his feet set on the rocks below, he signaled to me, and I untied the incriminating rope, letting it tumble to the ground. I envied its freedom. My hair blew in the wind as I stared at his shadowy profile disappearing into the night. "Goodbye," I whispered, my heart ripping open all over again.